This is On the Block with Bryce. I'm your host, Bryce Castle. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to hit up the block with me. I do appreciate it. Today's episode is fueled by, not brought to you by, just fueled by Waterloo Blueberry Sparkling Water. It's a little free advertisement for them for all the 4 people I have listening. But if you are one of the 4 people that listen to the show, Waterloo Blueberry Sparkling Water is fantastic, and you should go pick up some at your local grocery store and enjoy it. So on today's show, I want to talk about a couple of different things. Number one, those who do not learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. I think that's incredibly true. I think that's as true now, probably more than it's ever been in this country. And I want to tie what we're seeing in 2020 to something we've already seen more than 300 years ago. We'll talk about that. Also, I want to give you a unique take, or at least unique as far as I can tell, about the election coming up and the riots going on, and something nobody's really talking about that I want to point out, so we'll dive into that as well. Thirdly, in today's cancel culture, comedians are having a really hard time getting by without worrying about who on Twitter is going to put them on the chopping block. But what about the rest of us? Are we still allowed to tell jokes? And lastly, we will dive very quickly into the philosophy behind government and mask mandates, because in case you forgot, we still have a pandemic going on, coronavirus is still out there, and people are still wielding power like it was the biggest dick at an orgy. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, all the rioting we're seeing across the country right now, people lighting shit on fire, throwing Molotov cocktails into police cars, people, throwing rocks at each other, mobbing all over the place, attacking people running up to restaurants and trying to force people to put up the Black Lives Matter hand gesture. This shit's insane. Now I know, depending on who you talk to, maybe it's just a peaceful protest. I don't think lighting a building on fire is a peaceful protest. Regardless of how bad it actually is, maybe it's just a city block, maybe it's just a one-off incident. That's not what I'm here to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the mood that these people who are out in the streets rioting, what kind of mood they're in, and how we have seen this before. So like I said, those who don't learn from their history are bound to repeat it. And we have seen this in the past. We have been in a situation before in America where people became frenzied over a series of beliefs that had zero merit, and it didn't stop them from contorting facts, perpetuating lies, and perpetuating agendas to get what they wanted out of it, and in the end, a bunch of people died. Of course, what I'm talking about is the 1692 Salem witch trials. Now, if you don't know what the 1692 Salem witch trials are all about, if you don't know what they are, if this is your first time ever hearing about them, number one, shame on you. You're part of the problem. Shame on you. That is a richly interesting piece of American history. You should go look it up right now. I will briefly summarize it. Basically, back in 1692, a bunch of people started accusing each other of witchcraft. People started freaking out, and a bunch of fingers were pointed. People got into a frenzy, and before you know it, 23 people were dead by the end of the year. That is what we have going on right now. Everything out here right now is a Salem witch trial. We are living in a constant, perpetual Salem witch trial where everything is pointed out as evil, and everything that is evil must be stopped. It doesn't matter if you actually are evil or did anything evil. If the mob, if the people in the frenzy say you're evil, then you're evil and you must be dealt with in some sort of way. In Salem, they started hanging them off of trees. Right now, what we're seeing is people getting things thrown at them and getting assaulted and beat up. I think just last night, a 60-year-old couple was walking out of the White House area, because I know they were doing the RNC convention out there, and they were assaulted by a group of people. That's a great look for all the young people out there, but that's what happens when you let people mob and frenzy, when people get into these things. So let's make a couple quick comparisons. So back in 1692, people thought that there were people amongst their town who were practicing witchcraft, this great evil known as witchcraft, and that they were summoning all the power of the devil to lay curses upon everybody all over the place. Right now, I would compare that to the idea of racism. These people are out there frenzying over what they perceive to be racism. Now, it doesn't matter if it's actually racist or not. Just like back in 1692, it didn't matter if it was witchcraft or not. Once people get the idea that it's out there, once they get into a panic about it, and once they start to see benefit for them in it, they will perpetuate it. So in 1692, there was a lot of landowners who would really benefit from their neighbor being executed because of how the laws worked at the time. They could stake claim on that land if their neighbor was to, suddenly die of, let's say, execution by hanging for being a witch. And so you perpetuate stories and go, hey, they're a witch. And their kids say they're a witch too, and this person over there, says they never went to church, and so therefore they are a witch. Let's try them and let's execute them. That's what we have going on today. Everything's racist. It's automatically racist. As long as the people in the frenzy say it's racist, it is. Cops shoot that guy in Wisconsin, bam, immediately a racist situation. Now, never mind that he had the cops called on him by a girlfriend who he wasn't supposed to be seeing. Never mind that he stole her keys. Never mind that he had a arrest warrant out. Never mind that he had a knife on him. Never mind that the cops tried to arrest him peacefully. He fought them. They tased him. He fought that off, walked back to his car, reached in and grabbed something that ended up being the knife that they found on the floor of the driver's seat. So they shot him. He's not dead, but they shot him. Never mind all those facts, though. It's racist, it's evil, and now we're going to punish, if we can't punish the cops, we're going to punish society as a whole. Now define racism, define which. It doesn't really matter. It didn't really matter back then either. Once people started getting their own feelings and their own agendas into it. And one of the things that helped persecute people in 1692 was whether or not they could recite certain passages of the Bible, whether or not they knew the Lord's Prayer, more specifically. They were told to recite the Lord's Prayer, and if they could recite the Lord's Prayer, then they would be exonerated, and they wouldn't be a witch because they were told to say something, and then that appeased the mob that was after them. Well, that's what we have out here now. White people, specifically, but anyone that the mob accuses of being racist, must acknowledge their privilege, must acknowledge the systemic racism that, by and large, does not exist. In fact, on paper, there is no systemic racism. They have to acknowledge these things, and if they say exactly the right thing, they might still be punished, but they will be spared. We won't try to destroy your career. We'll punish you. We'll shame you. You'll have to, shame yourself a little bit, but you'll be spared. Just like in 1692, if you could recite the Lord's Prayer, then, well, we're still going to punish you for practicing witchcraft. Whether or not you did doesn't matter. We said you did, but we won't kill you. We won't execute you. Everything's a Salem witch trials now. And it's not just the riots, it's everything. You tell a joke 10 years ago and the Twitter mob finds it, well, now you're a racist, or now you're homophobic, or now you're some sort of ism that we don't like. Doesn't matter if it was a joke, doesn't matter if there was context, we don't give a fuck about context. We create the context as we go. You're a racist, you're a homophobe, you're a misogynist, and we will let you go as long as you recite the things we want you to say. But if you don't, then we'll keep coming after you until your career is dead. Maybe worse down the line. I mean, I don't know. Somebody showed up to the RNC yesterday with a guillotine and a Trump doll that they executed. So that was fun. That also reminds me of the French Revolution. You want to talk about a bloody situation when shit got out of control thanks to just frantic mob frenzy for 50 years. That's the French Revolution right there. So if you say something somebody doesn't like and the mob comes after you for it, you have to say what they want you to say in order to keep yourself from being, at least socially, executed. Just like in 1692, if somebody accused you of being a witch, you had to know the Lord's Prayer. And also, enough people had to back you up. So if your neighbor said you were a witch and your neighbor over here said you were a witch, you're kind of fucked. Just like now. Once people say you're a racist now, once the mob points out that you've done something racist or sexist or something, it's very hard to come back, if not impossible to come back, because the mob has already decided. In America, we have the precedence when it comes to being committed for a crime of being innocent until proven guilty. That means if somebody accuses you of something, the judge, the jury, anyone listening to the case goes in with the understanding that you are innocent until somebody can pinpoint reasons for why you are not. We assume the best in people. We assume their innocence. When you allow mobs to take over, when you allow mobs who have Puritan agendas against witchcraft back in Salem, or when you have mobs that have virtuous-like agendas when it comes to anti-racism, so-called anti-racism out there today, when you allow them to dictate people's innocence and people's guilt, you no longer have innocence until proven guilty, because their agenda dictates that there is evil out there, and in order to justify their existence, the evil must be out there so they can stop it. So innocent until proven guilty makes way for guilty until proven otherwise. Guilty until proven otherwise. You are automatically guilty because we have set the precedent of what guilt is, and you fit that description. No matter how much we had to contort it, no matter how much we had to, cramp it in to fit descriptions, we'll even just change the description so you can fit into the realm of guilt. And otherwise doesn't necessarily mean innocent. It just means we don't think you're maybe as guilty as we originally thought, or you're guilty, but we've absolved you of your sin because you've recited our version of the Lord's Prayer. And this is what the mob rule always, always, always does. They have an agenda, or they have a set of beliefs that they find to be superior over the beliefs of all else, and therefore it vindicates them in treating everybody else as however they feel, honestly. In Salem, they treated everyone as a witch. They treated everyone as worthy of execution, and today we see the same thing in our city streets right now. This is not a way to live. You do not want to perpetually live in a state where everything is like the Salem witch trials, because witchcraft is not a thing. I mean, people practice it, yeah, but there's no supernatural powers out there. You know, nobody in 1692 was summoning up the devil. People just thought they were because it played into a fear that they were able to then exploit for their own personal gain. Systemic racism in America, circa 2020, is not real. It's not real. It's not existent. Is there personal racism in America? Absolutely. But systemic? No way. No one's been able to point it out. But it doesn't matter. Because if it can give somebody virtue signaling points, or if it can help this mob frenzy perpetuate, then fuck it, they're going to do it. So watch yourself out there, because the mob could come for you next. And we can't keep having this, obviously. But that's what we have right now. And I think if people were more inclined to know their history, I think if people were more inclined to go, oh wait, hey, 1692, Salem, Massachusetts. We've seen what mob frenzy can do when people get hysterical and start running around for no reason, or for no virtuous reason anyway, accusing people of things that they haven't done, of doing things that don't actually exist. We've seen the end result of that. But since nobody knows their history, or at least they don't give a fuck enough to learn from it, they're going to repeat it. Because human beings, as complicated as our frontal cortex is, we still have a lot of that reptilian brain in the back, pushing us to do all sorts of ridiculous animal-like things, mobbing and frenzying and destroying all the stuff around us because we're angry. Well, I would consider that very reptilian-minded. Not a whole lot of frontal cortex going on there. That's the struggle of a human being, though, right? That frontal cortex of reason pulling against the reptilian brain, and sometimes the reptilian brain wins. But I think we've had enough human history now to look back and see the ramifications of what happens when that side of the brain takes over and wins, enough to go, hey, you know what? Let's not do that. So even if you believed there was a systemic problem, you could at least go, okay, well, we won't want to do that, because that ends up being catastrophic in the long run. Short term, people stop caring about what you're saying because they don't recognize it as anything viable. They only see it for what it is, destructive and unproductive. If you were to use reasoning, if you were to use that frontal cortex a bit to learn from history and go, okay, what courses can we take to get our message across in a way that people might appreciate, you would get a lot further. Then again, the left these days doesn't seem to be too concerned with history or lessons that history can teach us. They seem to dictate history as they go, changing it as they want to, and it doesn't look like that's going to stop anytime soon. And if you don't nip that shit in the bud, you no longer have the frantic frenzy puritans of 1692 and the Salem witch trials. You have yourself the party from 1984. And again, if you don't know what 1984 is, you've heard me talk about it, but shame on you all the same. In fact, stop listening to this show right now, go get a copy of 1984 and read it. I promise you it is as relevant today as it was in 1948 when it was written, and if it was around in 1692, it would have held significant relevance as well. It is a cautionary tale of what can happen when you allow radical, out-of-control, frenzied mobs to organize into something that actually wields real, dangerous, and consequential power. And it is based off of groups who did just that, like the Soviets and the Nazis, so check it out. Now, this ties into a point that I made last week about how Democrats have politicized this for their own gain. Of course, it's an election year. I think that's really fucking us, by the way. Between COVID and all this, being an election year is really fucking up progress that we can make through this, because, as we all know, politicians like to take things, hijack them, make them political, to use them against their opponents, and convince you that you should vote for them instead. Last week, we talked about the Democrats hijacking these riots, or using these riots as fuel to kind of strong-arm you into voting for them. So it's kind of like them they're like the proverbial mobster walking up to your business, which would be, whatever city you live in that's getting firebombed at the moment, and them going, hey, this is a nice place you got here. It'd be a shame if something bad happened to it, wouldn't it? And then they throw the proverbial Molotov cocktail through your window, and then they convince you that you need to pay them protection in order to make sure they don't do it again. In this case, protection would be a presidential vote in Biden, let's be real, Kamala Harris's favor. But the Democrats are not the only ones doing this. I think the Republicans are doing this too. I think Donald Trump and the Republican Party, the RNC, is also using these riots in their favor, just in a different way. And my argument is this. Donald Trump's the sitting president right now. And as we all know, when people start to riot like this, when federal buildings are attacked, when governors and mayors fail to uphold their constitutional responsibilities to protect life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness, the president has the authority to step in. And he has the authority to do this through the Insurrection Act. But he's not done it yet. Now, you could make a case and say he hasn't done it because this is an election year and he's afraid of another Kent State, or he might just be afraid of another Kent State situation generally. If you don't know Kent State, again, shame on you. Learn your history, but Kent State was an anti-war protest in the Vietnam days that turned very violent when the governor of Ohio sent the National Guard out. Somebody thought someone threw a rock at them, and before you know it, National Guard just opened fire on the crowd. It happened a couple of months later in Louisiana. Same situation. Bunch of people got killed by the National Guard. It's a very, very ugly look for a politician, especially during a voting year. With that being said, Trump's still not doing anything about it. And furthermore, they keep saying, hey, they're like the whole Republican voting pitch is, hey, look at how Democrats control the city. Vote for me. It's like, yeah, but you don't control that city, right? So even if we vote for you, are you going to do anything? And if you are going to do something, why aren't you doing it now? If you were so concerned about the health and well-being of all these cities and people, it's because they don't care. It's because if Donald Trump can keep showing footage of the riots, he can convince people that the Democrats are no good, and then they'll vote for him. Both sides are using these riots to give them voting favor. Now, honestly, the Republican strategy is a lot smarter of a strategy, because the Democrats saying it's okay because Trump's bad, and then they're saying the riots are okay, and that's not good. I think the Republican strategy is a lot smarter, but it's still really fucking gross. And the point is, these people don't fucking care about you. They don't. I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. They don't care about you. They're both willing to let cities burn for their own political advantage, just so they can have the seat in the White House. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Now, I think all the mayors and governors who let the rioting take place, I think they should all be recalled immediately and replaced. But as far as the president goes, Trump has the executive authority to lay down the Insurrection Act. He's not doing it. I suspect it has something to do with the election, because let's be real, a lot of people are on the fence about Trump. A lot of people find him to be off-putting. Well, it would definitely look very off-putting if you sent in a bunch of troops and people got hurt. You would look like a fascist dictator. Even though you're not, you would look that way. And everyone who was on the fence about him because of his personality may just be like, whoa, you know what? I didn't like the riots. I don't like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, but man, this guy's willing to send troops in. That's a fucking bad look, even if I hated the riots. Because as most Americans, we have this sense of the government. We don't want the government involved in our lives, and the government is no more involved in your life than when troops come in and start telling you what the news is. So it'd be a bad look to lay down the Insurrection Act right now. So he's not doing it. And instead, he's just going to sit there and be like, look how Democrats are in your city, vote for me. The question should be, vote for you and whatever his answer is, it doesn't matter, because it's like, dude, you're the president now. So why not, instead of make this promise come November, when Lord knows how much more will be burned down, you just do it now. But that's politicians for you. That's how they've always been during an election year. It's not about doing whatever's necessary in the here and now to appease their constituents, which is what we voted them to do. It's about saving face just enough to hold on to that seat that gives them exuberant amounts of money to sit there and tell people what to do. And this is coming from somebody who likes Donald Trump as a president. I mean, say what you want about his personality. I think he's been a good president for this country in a lot of ways, but that doesn't save him from the criticism of what's happening right now. And what's happening right now is cities are burning. He has every authority right now to send in troops, regardless of what the mayors and governors say, and he won't do it because it's a bad look for his campaign. Like I said last week about the Democrats, if they take the White House, this will all magically go away. If you see Trump take the presidency again and the National Guard gets sent in immediately, you'll know I was right. And I don't want to be right. I would like to think there are people out there who enter politics because they do have the best intentions in mind for the country and their constituents. But as we all know, the path to hell is paved in good intentions. I think this situation with the riots is being used as an election tool, and I think it's gross, and I think it's disgusting, and I think it should open up the conversation for third and fourth party candidates, because let's be honest, the choice between Democrats and Republicans always, constantly, is not really a choice. But that is a topic we will talk about next week. Okay, real quick, I want to talk about this sports announcer for the NHL who was fired for making a, quote, insensitive joke. This comes from thedailymail.co.uk. Mike Milbury, has been canceled. He has been vaporized. He has been figuratively sentenced to death for practicing witchcraft, as it were, for telling a joke that women were a distraction to professional athletes. Which, newsflash world, of course they fucking are. I mean, have you watched sports? Of course women are a distraction to professional athletes. Now, why is this not as big of a deal as NBC decided to make it? Comedy is something we all have a right to. We are all allowed to tell jokes. And because we are all allowed to tell jokes, we are all allowed to tell bad jokes. When you relegate comedy to just comedians, you take away the key thing that each person has within them to make light of situations that are otherwise too hard to deal with. Sexism is not a fun topic. When you're talking real sexism, when you're talking about actual sexism, it's a very uncomfortable subject. When you come across somebody who is an actual sexist, you're uncomfortable. You want to tell them what the news is. I know I do, because I'm a relatively sensible person. And I'm sure just like you would, because you're a relatively sensible person. So if somebody, for example, came up and pointed at a specific woman and said, "You are a distraction to this specific guy. How dare you?" and we start making fun of her and all that, that would be wrong. Because now we have crossed the boundary of comedy into actual meanness, into actual sexism. But if you just create an arbitrary story of people who don't exist and put them in a scenario to create a funny anecdote, you haven't committed sexism, because you're not pointing anyone out. See, that's the thing. You would never make fun of, I know this is going to sound terrible, but I mean, we need to be real when we talk about this stuff. You would never make fun of a rape victim, right? You would never point at a rape victim and be like, ha, 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 ha. You would never do that. But there are a lot of jokes about rape that are hilarious. Why? Is because one is funny because it's arbitrarily made up. It's not pinpointing anyone or anything. It is just taking the situation and making light of it. And that's what comedy does. It takes situations that are really hard to deal with and it makes light of it so that we can laugh, because laughter really can be sometimes the best medicine. Again, you're not laughing at any person specifically. If this commentator would have used people by name, he'd be out of line. But all he did was create a fictional story about fictional women that don't exist being a fictional distraction to fictional players that don't exist, and he just generalized in a fictitious way for humor. We have to be allowed to keep that because the human experience demands it, because life is hard and it's fucked up and it's brutal. And if you can't laugh at it, the only other thing you could do, I guess, is riot and burn shit down. And we don't want to see more of that. So this guy being fired for that is ridiculous. People need to stop being so sensitive. There is a huge difference between a joke and making fun of somebody. You gotta lighten up. If we relegate comedy to just the comedians, who, by the way, have a hard enough time telling jokes anymore thanks to cancel culture, but if we sit there and say, you're not allowed to make jokes because you're not a comedian, all of us are comedians. Honestly, all of us have the desire to make light of things, and we should continue to be allowed to. And if you don't like it, if the joke didn't hit, well, hey, guess what? That's comedy. Sometimes the jokes don't hit. What are you going to do? Like, cancel everyone when the joke doesn't hit? You haven't been to a lot of comedy clubs then. When comedians are working out their material, as they're working it out, they sometimes go up there and practice it. They tell it. If it doesn't get a laugh, they rework it. That's all that should have happened. This guy should have just, all right, bad joke, moving on. It doesn't make him a sexist. And to assume that somebody is as bad as a joke is, or as you perceive it to be, is making a lot of presumptions about them. Again, Salem witch trial type shit. You make presumptions about people, you can morph them into any evil you want, and then you can justify doing anything to them, and that can't happen. So let people keep their comedy. Let people keep that sense of therapy, really. I mean, that's what comedy is for so many people, for all of us, therapy. And if it's a bad joke, it's a bad joke, but as long as it's just a joke, who cares? So this guy shouldn't be canceled. Hopefully a radio station or something will pick him up. It won't be the same paycheck as primetime TV, but unfortunately that's the world we live in right now, and we shouldn't. So lastly, I want to talk about the mask mandates many of us are still obliged to follow when we walk around inside a store or another place like that. Sometimes even outside, depending on where you live, which by the way is stupid. But the masks are all stupid, and you know my personal feelings on that. The verdict is not in yet, whether or not they are effective against COVID or anything else for that matter. My argument is, if they were so effective to prevent diseases the way they say it prevents COVID, why not make people wear it during flu season? Why didn't we do that? Kids virtually are unaffected by COVID, but they die from the flu all the time. How come there's no masks on kids' faces during flu season when they're in school? So if you follow the train of logic there, it falls apart. What these masks do is they make people feel better. And I think most people have kind of seen that by now. It's like, okay, well, maybe they work, maybe they don't, but it makes people feel better. I've seen a lot of things that my left-leaning friends are posting about masks, like, well, at least, my heart's in the good place. I had good intentions when I put the mask on. So it's all about feeling. The government has no business in your feelings. None at all. The government should not mandate things based on your feelings. Not only is it wrong and a total invasiveness into your inner you, like into your person, but if you start mandating things by feeling, maybe this person over here feels good, but now because this person feels good, this person over here now feels bad. So what are you going to do? Mandate something to help their feelings? If the government is going to start going, well, we're going to, protect their feelings and not yours, well, now you're practicing discrimination. There's actually constitutional laws that prevent the government from doing that. There are what's called establishment clauses all over the Constitution and within the Bill of Rights, and even more that have been added since those two documents to prevent the government from discriminating against one group of people's rights in favor of another. There's a good reason for that, because obviously everyone's entitled to their rights. Now everyone's also entitled to feel how they want to feel. Isn't that what we've been saying? All the feeling mongers out there who have been canceling people because of how they feel and putting so much importance on feelings. Now all of a sudden, a group of people's feelings don't matter because your feelings are being placated, and now you have the government on your side. Well, if the government can't do it for rights, which is a very internal and personal, God-given thing, for lack of a better phrase, your feelings are the same, aren't they not? So if one group of people is having their feelings placated because these masks make them feel better, and the government's demanding that masks happen so it makes certain people feel better, that automatically means certain other people are having their feelings violated by the government. And if the government can't do it with rights, they shouldn't be allowed to do it with feelings. Now, if it does make you feel better as an individual, I think go for it. Wear a mask. If a business says, you know what, anyone who comes here, we would like them to wear a mask, go for it. It's your business. You can do that. It's when the government starts compelling people to do things based on, well, pseudoscience at best at this point. Again, the science is not in yet on whether or not these masks are effective. When the government starts compelling you to do things on pseudoscience, that's where we have a problem. And that's what we have going on right now. So, seeing as these masks are now widely accepted as just being a feel-good thing, the government has come in and made one group of people feel better at the expense of another. That's a discriminatory practice on the government's part, and it shouldn't be allowed to happen. And in normal circumstances, it wouldn't be happening. Now, you can feel however you want about COVID. That's fine. But the fact of the matter is, the numbers are all declining. People who have gotten this have got it, and they're moving on. This is going to be just another seasonal thing that we're going to have to watch out for. That's the reality. That's the only thing we really know for sure, is that it's on the decline and that we are dealing with it a lot better than we were in March. Everything else is still up in the air, and because it's all up in the air, because the government doesn't have a pinpoint, accurate piece of data on anything else, they need to stay out of the way. because then all they're going on is feeling. And since each person's feelings are their own, much like their rights are their own, the government's job, much like with rights, is to get out of the way whenever at all possible and only enforce them if things are going very, very terribly, which they no longer are. At least not when it comes to COVID. Anyway, that's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you have anything you would like to add to the conversation, maybe it's a disagreement or anything like that, go ahead and speak on it in the comments. Thank you for hitting up the block. We'll leave it there. We'll catch you next week. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to stay up to date on all our latest releases. If you really like this, share us with your friends and help spread the word on our little show here. Today's music was brought to you by Relax Music Meditation and comes from the playlist Coffee House Jazz, Calm Jazz Music, Relaxing Music. A link to their channel can be found in the description below. Thanks again for checking out the show today. We really appreciate your listenership. We'll catch you next week with a brand new episode. On the Block with Bryce was recorded at Beer and Bourbon Studios, Maricopa County, Arizona, and is a Jerk Cat Entertainment production.